Do you lean into problems or do you back off? When problems are left unaddressed, they have a tendency to snowball. What started as a manageable challenge becomes overwhelming and hard to address. In today's episode of the Leadership Project, I'm joined by Dan Tocchini of Take New Ground. Dan shares with us the secret of leaning into problems early and addressing conflict head-on. Not only do we address the issue, we also unlock the potential in the conflict. There are many insights here that we can all put into action in our own leadership and lives. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honoured today to be joined by Dan Tocchini. Dan is a founding partner at an organisation called Take New Ground and a co-host of the Naked Leadership podcast. He helps leaders in a very unique and powerful way around having courageous leadership and having creative conflict resolution and avoiding the things that you keep on avoiding. So that's going to be our topic today. Why do leaders keep on avoiding the topics and the discussions that need to be had? How do they take those courageous steps into that unknown world? And what are the benefits of doing so? So there's going to be a lot of actionable insights and tips from Dan on a topic that, quite frankly, we all need to discuss. So I'm really excited for this. Without any further ado, Dan, I'd love it if you would please say hello to the audience. I'd love to know a little bit more about your very rich background and what inspired you to do the work that you do today.
Well, thanks, Mick. It's great to be here. Appreciate it. And that's a big question. It really started for me when I was a really young guy. I was 12 years old. My mother was a manic depressive schizophrenic. And it was a really tough situation, as you can imagine. And I became the go-between between her and the psychiatrist because they wanted to, in the 60s, they were doing lobotomies, which means they cut the brain to pacify the patient. And they were talking about doing that with my mother. I talked my dad into letting me have a try to talk to her because I was really close to her. And I remember just starting to read all kinds of books around. I read a book called The Myth of Mental Illness by a guy named Charles Schraz. It wasn't a book, it was an article at the time that a woman gave me. I go to this therapist to debrief things, and it was very good. He later wrote a book by the same title. He's dead now, but it's a phenomenal book. And that opened my mind. I ended up reading incessantly and was able to reach her when she was in catatonia. It was an interesting story, but that is how I really got interested in human performance and how we do things. Then as I graduated from high school, pretty angry, chip on my shoulder, went to college on a football scholarship and just really wasn't motivated to play ball and got involved in drugs. And it was an angry kid and really recovered from a drug addiction and dealing and doing just criminal things at a young age. You know, I left school. And when I came out, when I started to recover, I got involved with an organization. My dad enrolled me in an organization called LifeSpring, which is part of the human potential movement. And while I was there, I saw the power of presence, the power of when somebody takes a stand. And I really was interested, how I could make a living doing that. And I got involved with the training company. And then I was invited to do some work with ESPN. I was invited to submit a request for proposal they gave me, and I submitted a proposal, and I couldn't believe it. I won this contract to help basically to restructure their finance department. And the gal who was the VP of HR there had done one of my trainings, and she was really impressed and wanted me to come in. I told her, I don't have a lot of experience at this, but I think I can do it. I submitted it and won, and it turned out well. I was there for 10 years, off and on, doing all kinds of stuff. They introduced me to Disney. I ended up writing a negotiation class that I both taught at the Harvard Negotiation Project at Harvard, and then I taught it at the Disney School of, their university there for their executives for about 5 years. And then from there, it was just word of mouth. We opened up a consulting firm. I sold that firm 2011, waited for a couple of years for the non-competes to pass. And then I opened up this company with a friend of mine who had hired me to do some work with kids coming out of gangs, because I had done a lot of work with kids coming out of gangs with my background, and created a curriculum on the East Coast that a company used. And it's the most studied curriculum right now in the US. And I trained them. I kind of wrote the curriculum, trained the people how to deliver it. And this guy had heard about it and asked me to come to work for him. And I did. And we did some work for lifers, guys coming out of prison who had life sentences and were coming out, they would get some parole after 20 or 30 years, how to reintegrate. That went really well. The guys who did that did really well. They were so good we trained 20 guys in the prison to be change agents. And they were trustees that the warden selected, we interviewed. And we trained them on how to do this training. It took 8 months. And then they started doing a training a week, and there are 3 prisons, 3 yards, turned the yards around. These guys were so good at this leadership training that the local colleges were bringing their MBA students into the prison to do their leadership training. And when these guys started getting out, they formed a group outside of prison and raised $37 million to have a reentry program, a very unique reentry program. And they got written into the California state budget, and they're killing it right now. So, the guy who I did that with left and started a coaching company and was doing real well with his coaching, and then started getting some consulting opportunities and called me in and he said, "Hey, can you help me land these?" And this was about 7 years ago. So the first year we worked together and landed a number of clients. And then I just merged my company with him, and we've been working together. His name is Adrian Kaler, and our company now is Take New Ground.
All right. Well, congratulations on your success. A few things I want to share with you that I took away from that. First of all, in terms of being there for your mother and seeing that, and that opening your eyes, the human condition and human potential and human performance is really interesting. And the changes that we've seen in mental health and the way that we approach that has been really interesting over that time. You said something really powerful there along the way around the human potential, and you said about the power of presence. And I've also read in some of the stuff that you've been doing, Dan, you talk about if you don't address the now, forget about the future. I'm paraphrasing a little there. Tell us about this power of presence and the need to address the now before we can consider a brighter future.
Oh, great question. Big question. So I'll do my best here. When I talk about the power of presence, it's that we all know what that is when you see somebody who's there, connected, available, unconditionally, like they're willing to do what it takes. They're willing to face the losses for the gains. And we call it taking a stand, right? That kind of presence is, I'll do whatever it takes. And you can tell somebody's there because they're willing to have the hard conversations first. One of the things we talk about, you mentioned it, you kind of alluded to it, is one of the things or principles we work with is what you don't face now will probably defeat you later because you're not prepared. You haven't been willing to look into it. It becomes a blind spot. And then you're surprised, because things fail slowly and then all at once. So, when the things start to fail just a little bit here and a little bit there, well, it's okay. I'm still getting by. But by the time it gets out, over a period of time, well, then you've got what we call a shit buffet, right? We have a little principle. It's called the shit hors d'oeuvre principle. First, a breakdown comes to me as an hors d'oeuvre. And if I don't eat it, if I push it away, my grandfather used to give me this all the time. If you push it away, Junior, it's going to come back as a sandwich. And then if you push the sandwich away, it comes back as a 2-course meal. And you push that away and you've got a buffet that you've got to eat. And so to me, that really has been true. I've noticed that where I've had the most difficult time in my life is where I pushed things off until they demanded my attention. I had to pay attention to them. And so it's one of the things I'm vigilant about, both in my personal life and with my clients. Better we face what's difficult as soon as we can. And there's all kinds of research, clinical research on what happens if you let something that's difficult go. The longer you let it go, the more people have time to make things up about it. Then you have to wade through everything they made up about it just to get to the problem, if you get that far.
Yeah, loving it, Dan. I want to reflect some of that back to you. So this is a big part of what we're going to talk about today is in a lot of leadership teams, they are future driven. They talk about their vision. They talk about utopia at the other end of a change journey, but they're not spending enough time addressing what's holding them back. So they are looking progressive, which is nothing wrong with that. But if you don't address the things that are holding you back, they will come back to bite you. But now what I'm hearing from you is not just that they'll come back to bite you, but they'll compound over time. And when it comes back to bite you, it's going to be this magnification. It's going to be multiplied multiple times over, including people have started to tell us, make their own assumptions about the problem. They started to tell stories in their own head about how big it is. They might have even catastrophized over time. And before you know it, you've got a mountain of a problem where it could have been a molehill.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. Most consultancies will come in and develop a beautiful vision of the future. That's fantastic. But in order to get to that future, you have to locate where you and your team are right now, right? So that's one of our differentiators is there's no way to get the current situation, the current reality up to the level of your vision if you don't accurately embrace, face, engage the current reality. And particularly the things you don't want to face that you know are out. Because there's only really 3 problems we ever face. I think as a leader, most leaders know that when you implement something new, you're going to have a series of new breakdowns. And so that is part of the reluctancy to start to make moves because whatever I embark upon, I'm going to have a new set of breakdowns. So the key is to know which breakdowns should I deal with, which ones are the most important ones. And the only way to do that is to understand that there's 3 fundamental breakdowns. There's a normal breakdown, there's an abnormal breakdown, and then there's a pathological breakdown. And a normal breakdown is something like, in order to tell whether they're normal, abnormal, or pathological, you got to really take them in context. So if you and I are talking, you got a new business, and you're having some cash flow issues, and you're having some trouble landing your personnel, well, that's a normal problem. That's something that's in the course of business. But now if you've been in business for 3, 4, 5 years, and you're having cash flow issues, and you're still having big turnover issues, that's an abnormal problem. And maybe even pathological, but that would be something I'd want to look at right away, given the context of the business you're in. And it's hard for a lot of leaders to just stop and assess and connect with the context of their business, and then to analyze what are the issues that we've got before us and which ones are most important to deal with. And because you're always going to have problems to deal with, which ones, though, are most important. And that's the way we usually go about discerning it, and getting after it, if you will.
Yeah, let me play back what I'm taking from that. So in business, we do have challenges, and there's difference between a normal and an abnormal problem. A normal one, what I'm taking away, Dan, is a business challenge that the existing team with the right resources, empowerment and enablement are going to be able to solve given enough time. Whereas an abnormal problem might be something structural that if we don't relook at the way that we're addressing the business and addressing the market, we will never solve it. So how does that sit with you?
Yeah, you nailed it. Yeah, you're never going to get to it. You're not going to discover, because you may not know how to deal with it, to resolve it at first, but if you don't engage it, you'll never learn what it's going to take to resolve it. And then that becomes an Achilles heel as you move along, because at some point that could cave in on you.
Yeah, okay. So this is a good strategic level version of what we're talking about. I want to throw a different one to you and see how this sits with you. I'm thinking back to some of this stuff about, if we avoid the problem, it just gets worse. One of the key ones for leaders listening to the show will be the avoidance of performance discussions, where someone's behavior in the team is not in line with the values of the group, right? So their behavior has to be brought into line in some way. And there's multiple ways you can do that. But leaders do have a tendency to have this avoidance. Now what happens, instead of, it might be something that starts as a little minor behavior that the person has got no self-awareness that it's an issue. And then 2 years later, it's compounded and they've continued that behavior and they've got no idea that they're doing the wrong thing. And now all of a sudden it's ingrained. Not only is it ingrained, it's impacting those around them. So it's starting to impact the culture. So a conversation that we could have had 2 years ago to do a slight correction and say, Dan, we don't do things like that around here. Let's have a chat about that. Could have been a really easy conversation. All of a sudden is a cultural issue in the business. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, that's the territory of, when you're working in a culture, you'll see that. And there's a tension there. There's a natural tension whenever you're working with people. And one of the things we've identified are 12 tensions that arise, are just natural whenever you're trying to accomplish something with a group of people. So when you're managing a group of people, when you're leading them, there's a tension there. The tension is between warmth and empathy, or creating a connection and a relationship with the team, the person that you're working with, and enforcing necessary rules and regulations. And that tension is they sound like it's a paradox. They sound like they're opposites, but they're actually interdependent. In order to be good at enforcing, I've got to have a relationship where the person I'm working with is able to receive what I'm talking to them about. And what tends to happen is people tend to be either high on warmth and empathy and low on enforcing, in which case they become permissive. And that permissiveness sends messages to the client, to the employee, or whoever you're working with, that it's okay what they're doing because you haven't said anything. So they're going to take that as tacit consent naturally. And you might just be thinking, well, I don't want to be a micromanager. I don't want to seem like I'm going to meddle in everything they do. So I'm just going to let it go until I see if they can straighten it out. And then when I go to talk to them about it, they're surprised, maybe even upset, because they feel like they were doing well and now you're talking about it. And then that starts some friction. What usually happens is when the leader goes to enforce, they usually come to enforce in a harsh way because to them it feels like this person has taken advantage of the leeway that they've given them without recognizing that they've given tacit consent to the behavior because they haven't said anything. And then I get back from leaders, well, I'm not here to babysit. Well, no, you're right. But it's interesting. That's how you would frame it, right? It's like the minute I'm not here to babysit is saying that, oh, I see, I had no part in this. It's really just them. Like I'll ask them, well, did you tell them about it? Well, yeah, I mentioned it. And how long did it go on? Well, it went on for 3 or 4 more weeks. Did you write them up? Were they clear about how to recover it? Well, no, I just kept mentioning it, right? But I did nothing. So what I'm doing is I'm contributing to a situation that other people are watching. And if they see me dealing with that person that way, they're going to begin to think they can do the same thing. Now, it doesn't mean all of them will, but it does set a precedent where people they get that it's okay to not do what they came to do, or at least seek out correction in order and learn what it's going to take to accomplish what they're to accomplish. So the leader has a huge role in that. And usually if somebody's permissive, they're trying to manage with their personality. They've given up the standard and how important it is both to the person's individual development and the organization's success in the mission to hold the standards. And that's a conversation that has got to be elevated and respected on the team. But we often don't do that because we're afraid it's going to upset people, or they're going to, which is okay. If they're upset, it's great to explore. But I know a lot of leaders don't want that upset because they feel like it's a distraction and they don't want to be bothered with it because they have, quote unquote, more important things to do.
Yeah, but coming back to our thing, they're avoiding the upset for now, but it's just going to compound. So listening to you, I can think of examples in my own career, in my own leadership, where I've done this. I'll stick up my hand and say that I've made this mistake countless times.
Yeah, I have a lot of those T-shirts in my closet.
So if you think about, the sandwich model of giving feedback, it's used a lot. You start with something soft, and then you get to the meat of the issue, and then you finish with something soft. And a lot of people use that model, but what is the person taking away? Did they genuinely have an understanding of both the content and the significance of the feedback that was just giving them or not? Or do they walk away with, the boss thinks I'm doing a great job? And hang on a second, no, there was some meat in there that you missed because you heard the fluffy bit at the start and the fluffy bit at the end. You didn't understand the gravity of the meat in the middle. And then it compounds for 2 years. And then they're really surprised when it comes to a head and say, like when it really blows up, they go, but you've told me I've been doing a good job for 2 years.
Yeah. And well, you hit it on the head. You got to care about the people you work with. You got to care about their development. If you don't, if you're just using we have a very powerful way of enforcing. I'll talk about it. But the framework is only as good as the person who cares about the other person, because any framework, like the sandwich framework, if you're doing that because why are you doing it? Are you really doing it for their development, or are you doing it just to reduce your own discomfort or the potentiality for conflict? Because most people don't see the potentiality in conflict. And we found that that's the great adventure, that if conflict comes up and I'm able to contain it, inevitably, that's going to be it's going to make the team stronger and the individuals stronger that are involved if we can resolve it and working through it. And most people don't have an idea of how to do that. So they get panicky when it comes up. It's like, if you've ever skied, when you start going fast, if you get panicky, you're probably going to wreck, right? You've got to You got to lean into the speed. Well, when somebody gets upset, can you even name the breakdown? And the breakdown that you name, does the other person recognize it, or do they think the breakdown's something different? That's usually the first step. Like, this is a breakdown for me. Here's why. And I give an example. And then I can tell them, this is why it's a breakdown for me. Here's where I saw it. This is what I think it is. This is what's got my attention. And then I'm going to talk to them about how I feel when it happens. When you do this, I don't know what to do. I feel like I want to come over and support you, but I don't want to micromanage you, but I also don't want you to lose. I want you to win. So I want to talk to you about this issue. And I can see, the next thing is, I can see how I've contributed to some of this by not addressing it earlier. So I'm owning my part. And then I can tell them, if we don't get this cleared up, here's what's inevitably going to happen. At least this is what I see is at stake. Now, it could be, you might lose your bonus, or you're not going to get that raise, or you might lose your job. It just depends on what the future you see could come if it doesn't get addressed with. And then I can ask them, what do you say? What do you think? I can hear them there. And I usually prepare before I go into a meeting like that, so I can be hard on the problem and soft on the person. I want to be connected to the person. I want to get side by side with them, because if I get head to head with them, inevitably I'm just going to move them out. Now, I want them to either earn their way into the position or earn their way out of the company, one or the other. And I want them to be aware of what's at stake along the way, and that I'm standing for them to earn their way in. The minute I don't believe they can make it, I need to cut it off there, because I'll just start gesturing and they'll pick it up.
There's 3 really powerful things I'm taking away, Dan. I want to play it to you and get your feedback on this. The first one, and this is something we've spoken about on the show before, is 100% true that when someone has gone out of their way to give you feedback, it is a sign that their love and care for you is greater than their fear of the uncomfortable conversation. So that's a very powerful message there. I love your metaphor of skiing, and I want to think about this. Are you going to lean in, or are you going to back off? Are you going to lean in, or are you going to back off? And too often, what I do think happens is you start the uncomfortable conversation. It starts to unravel a little bit. It gets uncomfortable. Now the words that start coming out of your mouth start diminishing the message because you back off. Whereas what we should do is lean in. And I'm going to say something that popped into my head while I was listening to that, Dan. Leaning in may also be saying nothing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Hold some space and let it sink in for the person.
And let it play out.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I want to contain it. I want to understand it. Because a lot of times, one of the things we train our consultants with and our clients on is to listen to their own listening, because they have a tendency, we all do as human beings, we don't hear each other. We actually hear what we're making up about what the other person's saying. And then we give the other person credit for what we made up. And we usually get, most of the time, what I've found is the situation isn't what's causing my upset. It's what I've decided that situation means that causes me to get upset. And so if I can catch that, I can test it or explore it and see what's really going on with the other person and what might be valid or what I might not be seeing. There's an array of possibility there that emerges if I can speak. It's like argue like you're right, but listen like you could be wrong, right? So that the person can get the message, but they also of what you see, but they also get you're willing to see what they see and that you might be missing something.
And that's where we do need to hold space, right? So the more we talk, the more we run the risk that we actually derail the conversation and defocus from the original message. So let's hold space. Let's let the message sink in. Let's not diminish by adding words that aren't even needed in that conversation. Then the third thing I picked up there, Dan, was that you're still doing it with empathic concern. So you're staying true to the topic, but you are still doing it with an empathic concern element to it around it is a human being that's in front of you, but without watering down the message.
Yeah, exactly. I think you hit it on the head there as far as what the tendency to want to water down the message is really tempting, because, I know that feeling in your body, right? And the feeling in the body is, oh shit, this could go sideways. And this person, I need them, because if I don't have them, I'm going to have to do their work, or I'm going to have to find somebody who's not as good as them on the team or not as familiar or whatever. There's all kinds of a list of potential prices I'm going to have to pay. And I'm doing my best to prevent that from happening instead of doing my best to have what I'm committed to with them turn out. That's a big difference. That's what I mean by presence. If I'm presencing myself to play not to lose because I'm afraid of losing something, so what I'm saying is to prevent what I'm losing, then I'm going to probably come out dissatisfied, and so are they, because I'm not going to get to the bottom line of what I had to say, and they're not going to know exactly what's required of them. And that tension's going to live because they're going to see it's going to recur and recur and recur until the honest situation comes to the surface. So that's a big.
It's really good, Dan. I'm going to connect two things that you've said in the last 5-10 minutes or so and explore that with you. So you've now used the word playing not to lose. And about 5 minutes ago, you used the word the potentiality in the conflict. So in that present moment, if we start watering down the message, we start backing off instead of leaning in, we're playing not to lose, we miss the opportunity of the potentiality in the conflict. Tell us more about potentiality in the conflict.
So I'll tell you a story. I had a client that they had hired me to come in and raise money and restructure their company. She was from New Zealand, and the CEO graduated top of her class at Wharton. She's just an amazing woman, and had built this team, built this company, and then got hammered. First when the tech bubble failed, then she started pulling it back, and then 9/11 hit, and it was in the consumer space, so it got hammered. And she lost all her options, and the VCs who had loaned them $17 million wanted to dismantle the company, close the tranche. She was going to have to send the guy who was her number one guy back to England because his visa would be up and he wouldn't be able to stay on and work. And I remember talking to her about, I actually talked to her on the phone going to the airport because my partner wanted me to talk to her because she was really depressed. And she was meeting with the VCs on Tuesday and was pretty much surrendered to just dismantling the company. And he asked me, do you think you can help her? I said, I don't know. I need to talk with her, but I'm going to Europe. So I talked to her on the phone briefly and I said, have these things ready, balance sheet, all the necessary, profit and loss, cash flow statement, and your plans for what you want to do. And then let's sit down. And we did 2 8-hour meetings 2 weeks later. And she goes, well, they're going to be a little upset. I mean, they want to talk to me. I said, that's okay. Put them off. Let them be upset. That's okay. And so she put them off and we came up with a plan. Now, the situation was we were going to raise $1 million. The offer we were going to make, I told her, look, here's what we're going to do. They've got to feel the desperation. They've got to feel, and I knew I'd done some research on the VC firm. They had a young partner doing it. I knew if he could salvage something out of this, he makes a mark for him with them. So I told her, I said, how much do you think they're going to lose if they just close it down? She said, about 2.5-3 million more. And I said, well, how much do you think they would save if we could, if they, instead of closing it down, they were willing to sell us, restructure the debt, and we'll bring $1 million and we'll take over $500,000 in debt that you have. And that way they don't have the dismantling costs. It'll probably save $3 or $4 million. She goes, well, they might do it, but I don't think they're thinking that way. I said, okay, well, our job is to get them to think that way. And she goes, what do you mean? I said, I want you to put the books together in a way that they really get how bad this is. And I want you to send it to them. And then I want you to go dark for a week. And she says, oh, they're going to be upset. I said, that's right. But what are they going to be thinking? Well, the young guy who's dealing with you is going to be thinking, oh, man, and they're going to be pressuring this kid about getting something done. And then in a week later, we'll call him back and you can tell him the offer that we have, which is what I just described. So she goes, you sure? I go, yeah, do not talk to him. Turn your phone off. So she did. And it was driving her nuts. The conflict is brewing, right? So she does what I asked her to do. And sooner or later, she calls them and they're ready to deal. And she tells them, this is what I can do. These guys are willing to put this $1 million up and take over this $500,000 and restructure your debt down to that from $17 million. And she showed them how they could say it would just be much better for them. And they'll get some of this money back, et cetera. And they were willing to do it, right? They said, okay, well, let's talk to those guys. So she put me in touch with them. Now, I told my partners, they said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to tell them when they ask what we're going to give, I'm going to say nothing. And they said, I'm going to say nothing. We're just going to take over the $500,000 in debt. They said, well, that's going to bring a lot of upset. I said, that's okay. The upset is not a problem. What we're doing is we're actually helping them understand how vital this is. They're now sold on the deal, and I don't want them to back. I don't want any back trading or any of that. Well, they go, well, Linda doesn't know. I said, that's good that Linda doesn't know, because her reaction will be authentic. So they call me. I give him the offer. He immediately gets off the phone, calls Linda. She calls me crazy, upset. I said, calm down, calm down. She goes, you made me look bad. I said, no, I made me look bad. I'm going to make you look like the good guy. You go back and say, because it's true, you didn't know I was going to do that. And you let them know that we're just some country bumpkins from Northern California. We don't understand finance and VCs and all that. And you talked us back in to bring in the million. And that would set her up to be kind of on their side. And the thing went well. And they ended up having a board member, a board observer. And whenever we got any problem, Linda was always the one that the board observer went to. And I was always the bad guy, which enabled me to understand what they were thinking, because he would tell Linda what she was thinking. But if I couldn't hold that conflict, if I couldn't stand in that with the vision in mind, then I would have buckled, and I wouldn't have risked their wrath. And her thing was, well, what if we don't get the deal? I said, no matter what happens, we're better off. Even if they don't do the deal, you haven't lost any ground. So it actually grounded her. We were able to close the deal. She ended up turning the company around. I think the revenues went from 4 million to almost 17 million in the next 2 years. And she ended up selling the company for 45 million, I think, 4 years later.
So there's a few things I'm taking away from that, Dan, and around this potentiality and conflict. And for me, the potentiality of conflict is, what are we going to unlock when we can finally address this elephant in the room, this hairy beast, whatever? What is the potential that we're unlocking? But the important thing in the story you just shared is there needs to be some level of awareness along there of the significance of the problem. Otherwise, people's fear of loss is going to be greater than their appreciation of the gain. And unfortunately, the human brain is wired in that way. We're wired to avoid loss more than appreciate gain. In this case, we almost needed to create a burning platform where inaction was worse than action. So we create the burning platform.
Yeah, I call it the parade of horribles. We actually sat down. I sat down and said, look, we've got to create a parade of horribles. And as we created them, I wanted to enact some of it, so they felt the deal was more tentative than it was, so that they would want to come forward. It's like fishing. They're going to come towards it. My point is, I didn't do this on a whim. I had done a lot of research. I researched who this guy was that was the partner, the junior partner that was dealing with it. I researched the company. They're in the medical space. They wanted to get out of the tech space. They took a flyer. I wanted to understand everything I could about the people at the table and the people that aren't at the table that they're representing, so that I could understand the tensions that would be playing into the deal, right? So that's what really helped me formulate what I was doing and plotting it out. Is I probably spent 90% of my time researching and then 10% of my time executing. And I think a lot of times people, because we get up against a problem, we don't want to look at the problem. We try to get away from the problem because it's uncomfortable, rather than connecting with the problem, like really looking into it and understanding not its symptoms. You start at the symptoms, but getting back to the causes. And I think that's another skill that they're completely capable of doing. It's just that, do they have the patience and the fortitude to persevere, to understand what's actually producing the problem? Oversimplifying the problem is a problem.
All right, really powerful. So coming back to this now and future type element. So what we've got here is the realization that if we don't address the problem, it is going to haunt us forever. Let's say it's always going to hold us back. But to get people to that level of realization, we need to get them to realize, to get over their fear, because the fear is driving the inaction. The fear of loss has led them to freeze, and they're not acting on the problem that's right in front of them. So now we make them realize that actually in action, the problem is going to happen anyway. The loss is going to be realized. So the sooner you address the problem, the sooner we can talk about the future. And by the way, the future is a lot brighter.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of research on this, but how you get people over a phobia, for instance, what they're afraid of, that they won't look at or that it controls their life, is that they voluntarily be willing to look into it step by step, more and more. It's got to be voluntary. And the more they do, the more they look into it, the more they start to handle it instead of it handling them. So one of the things I like to do with people when I'm working with a team is I want them to be clear about their vision first. So there's a grounding about what future they're standing for. Then I want to address the things they're most afraid of. I want to look into them, because the more they look into them, the more they're going to feel confident about dealing with it. And that's really the key component, is how willing is the team individually to look at the issues both collectively and individually that are preventing them from having what they say matters to them. And we call it hugging the cactus.
I like that one as well. Another great metaphor. All right, Dan, so we've covered a lot of ground here, and you've given us a lot to stop and reflect and rethink on around this avoidance of conflict. I'm going to say that's the key message today. The first one is that when we avoid the conflict, all it does is compound over time, and it just gets worse. And what could have been a very quick and easy fix has all of a sudden become something that's quite pervasive in our business, is impacting more than what it originally was. So let's get over our fears. Let's address it early. Your hors d'oeuvre versus the 2-course meal versus the 3-course meal, the buffet. Yeah, it was really spot on. The second part I want to take away is also, are we going to lean into the problem, or are we going to back off when it gets uncomfortable? And if we don't lean in, we won't actually solve it. In fact, people will walk away with some kind of tacit or implicit acceptance that what was happening was okay. Acceptance. And acceptance turns into pervasiveness. So we need to lean into the problem, not back off when it gets uncomfortable. And then the third one is then to consider the potentiality of the conflict. So once that conflict is resolved, what is it going to unlock? Then you can think about the future, right?
Be willing to face the worst case scenario so you're prepared in case that occurs. You're going to feel much more grounded and confident when you're at the table. And it's a big deal. To me, this is at the heart of, I know when I do a turnaround, if we get this in, we're going to make miles very quickly.
Yeah. All right. So we're looking at what is the worst thing that can happen, but we're also going, imagine the possibility of the world once this problem is finally done and dusted, right?
Yep. Yeah. What are we going to have?
So stop avoiding, lean in, address it now so you can unlock your future. Really love it, Dan.
And one more, be willing as much as it says, and it's as important to know what I'm going to say now as it is to know the future, is to know what is the parade of horribles that you are going to encounter if you don't make a shift, if you don't have the conversation, if you don't take the risk, if you keep settling for short-term gain, you're going to have long-term pain. And what kinds of long-term pain are you going to have? You're going to have second and tertiary things that you don't even recognize until they come, like other people wondering what happened, other people thinking they can do what this other person was doing. There's a million things we can list like that.
That was another really powerful takeaway. So it's often the fear that stops us from acting, but what we need to create is that there's more fear in not acting.
Yeah, exactly. There's more trouble.
There's more trouble. Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay. All right. Love it, Dan. This has been really, really cool. Thank you so much for your wisdom today. I want to take us now to our rapid round. These are the same 4 questions we ask all, I guess. The first one is, what's the one thing you know now, Dan Tocchini, that you wish you knew when you were 20?
How important listening is. Like, listen like I could be wrong, and authentically listen like I could be wrong. Seek out the ways I am wrong or missing the mark when I'm talking with somebody. Doesn't mean I have to get off of what matters to me. It means I may find a new way to contextualize it like that. And so, yeah, as you can tell, I'm pretty confident in myself, and that's gotten me into trouble. Hubris and arrogance, and you can see they're there. And so listening like that's really made a difference for me.
Yeah, love it, Dan. Thank you for sharing that. What's your favorite book?
Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I've probably read it 6 times.
Oh, well. Okay, good. Very good. What's your favorite quote?
There's 2 of them I love, but William Glasser said, human beings' sense of themselves ranges from flattery to pure fantasy.
That's fully true. Yeah. All right, love it. Okay. All right, very good. And Finally, Dan, there's going to be people listening to this and going, yeah, I do struggle with all of those things that Dan and Mick just spoke about, either organisationally or individually as a leader. How do people find you if they'd like to know more?
There's the leadership website first, which is takenewground.com. And then our podcast is the Naked Leadership Podcast, which is on both Apple and Spotify. And we've been doing it for 5 years. We've got I think almost over 200 episodes. So you can find it there. And that's probably the best way. I'm on Instagram, Dan_Tocchini, and I'm on LinkedIn as well.
All right, brilliant. Thank you so much, Dan. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation today. I feel richer for it. It is conversations that we need to have. You've really opened up some paths here for people to take action around what we've been discussing today, to step into the discomfort, to lean in and address those problems once and for all so that you can unlock your future. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mick. Really enjoyed it.
You've been listening to the Leadership Project. In the next episode, I'll be joined by Sloan, the real Sloan, and she shares her inspirational story of how she broke away from societal expectations to craft a life full of purpose and meaning. You don't want to miss this inspirational story of how Sloan now helps other women to do the same. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel, where we bring you live streams and video podcasts every week. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project at mixbeers.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content, and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spears. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel, where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.